90% sure that Balfour's Christian name was Arthur, and I can't remember what Robert's surname was.
Okay, I'll take what you say, but I'd love to hear what anyone else says as well.
No, Diane, it doesn't work like that. I've given you the correct answer.
Is it?
Yes. Of course,
I'll take your word for it, James.
Qualifications genius. Qualifications genius.
Genius, I agree.
Round of applause, thank you, Diane. Thank you. You are, of course, allowed to launch a steward's inquiry, but you do so at your peril. Stefan's in Manchester. Stefan, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
It's the cricket-related answer.
Oh, yes.
So cow corner, as I understand it, comes from the position on the field where if you go way back to the origins of the game, when it was played in colleges back in the early days, it would be a bit of a pastured field, and that was the part of the field where they could lead the cows. But it comes from the fact that that's the bit on the field back in the day where it would be safe to put the cows because nobody ever hit the ball in that direction.
That's what I thought. I was closer to what I thought than to. But we've given him a round of applause now, and you get one. But I'm looking now. I don't know if anyone else is listening to this program. I'm looking for the derivation of fielding positions in general.
I mean, there's some very quirky names going around, James, and to be fair, it is one hell of a mystery, but it is one that's been debated many times at our cricket club, and yeah, I've certainly had a look at this in the past.
And cow corner, that makes perfect sense. At my prep school, we used to have sheep grazing on the rugby pitches, and
I'm not quite sure you'd see it at Lords nowadays, but certainly that was the case back in the 1800s when it started.
No, you would have done. Qualifications?
First team cricket captain at Mottram Creek.
Which cricket? Mottram?
Mottram Creek, that's correct.
Where's that?
So that is just east of Manchester, near Gloucester, just before you get to the Peak District.
No, that's why I recognise the name. I used to live near there. I used to live in Birch Vale.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful place. Been up to Birch Vale many a time, just in between Hayfield and New Mills.
I lived in Hayfield as well when my dad was on the local paper.
Oh, look at this, absolutely splendid. We used to play in the Derbyshire and Cheshire League, so I played down the Village Cricket Club at Hayfield is magnificent.
I mean, this is going back to when I was, before I was 4, but goodness me, isn't that lovely? I don't know where that name resonated with me. I must have just recognised it from the mists of time. Round of applause for Stefan, please. Once again, in the interests of keeping the producer sweet, please don't ring me in with any more cricket answers, all right? She's had enough of cricket answers, apparently. Don't know why, because we haven't finished them, but that is the message I've received. So don't ring me to answer the question about the origins of fielding positions. Otherwise, our lives won't be worth living. 26 minutes after 12 is the time. Martin is in Haringey. Martin, question or answer?
Yeah, it's a question. Hi there, James.
Hello,
yeah, what it is, But where I come from, we call everything like county. Like,
are you providing your own little musical accompaniment in the background there?
That's another phone.
Is it? I thought you were chatting to me like Richard Stilgo then, doing a little bit of tickling the ivories. Hello, James. Ding, 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 ding. I'm on Mystery Hour. Do, 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 do. So, carry on.
We call it like County Louth, County Devon, County Fermanagh. In this country, there's only one. They call it County Durham. They don't call it anything else like County Kent, County Essex. It's not that I didn't my eyesight tested or anything.
They might do it the other way around. They just drop the county because it's Kent County Council, isn't it? So,
yeah.
So they might say Kent County.
Why do they call it County Durham, though?
Why does the county come before the Durham? It's probably got something to do with boundary changes and reassigning counties, but that doesn't completely answer your question either way, does it?
No.
Yeah, all right, I'll find out for you. I've got that vague niggling sense that I should know this, and I might have been. But that's what life increasingly feels like, isn't it? As you get older, a vague niggling sense that you do actually know this, but you're damned if you can remember it, Martin. Yeah. You're on the board, and I like the
exact moment of slipping into unconsciousness, effectively, and it was very much the same. Yeah, so it wasn't an unpleasant finale, if you like, but yeah, no real memory of the very last moment.
Stay with us for part 2 of Outlook to find out what happened to Chris.
This is the BBC World Service, where we're tackling the US Constitution.
The United States of America. land where speech is free.
Our country is defined by her great people, and our democracy is defined above all else by our Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States, a nearly 250-year-old document that defines the principles of American government and the basic rights of U.S. citizens.
Take that off! Take it down!
After the storming of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, flaws in that founding document became clear.
Today's discussion is about the Constitution, and it is about the American people.
I'm Brian Palmer, seeing whether it's time the U.S. Constitution got a 21st century makeover.
A constitutional conversation. Tuesday at 9:20 GMT.
Still to come on Outlook, British diver Chris Lemons is alone at the bottom of the North Sea and his supply of air has run out. A rescue team then come across his body.
He wasn't moving around the top of the structure. He was lying on his back and his arms were sort of up at 45 degrees, but like floating. And he was twitching slightly.
When they retrieve him, he's been without air for about 35 minutes. So what happens? Find out after the latest BBC News.
BBC News, I'm John Shea. Even as EU countries wait for the European Union's drugs regulator to present the findings of its investigation into the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine, the World Health Organization has again called on countries to continue using it, saying its benefits outweigh any possible risks. A number of countries have suspended the vaccinations after reports suggested it could be linked to blood clots. A day of national remembrance is being held in Italy for the victims of COVID-19, marking a year since pictures emerged of military trucks carrying dozens of coffins in the northern city of Bergamo. Prime Minister Mario Draghi laid a wreath at the cemetery there in honour of more than 103,000 Italians who've lost their lives to the disease. The military authorities in Myanmar say they're preparing to file corruption charges against the detained civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. State television broadcast a confession by a businessman who claimed he'd given her cash. The Suu Kyi's lawyer dismissed the allegations as groundless. UN human rights experts have called for the immediate release by Iran of an academic with dual Iranian and Swedish nationality who was sentenced to death in 2017. They say Ahmed Reza Jalali is in a horrific situation after more than 100 days in solitary confinement. Russia is hosting peace negotiations between senior figures from the Afghan government and the Taliban. Arriving in Moscow, the head of the Afghan High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah Abdullah, said he hoped the conference would be beneficial. Washington has proposed the formation of a temporary power-sharing government. And the lower house of the Spanish Parliament has passed a bill to allow euthanasia. Legislation comes with a raft of safeguards. Hailed by right-to-die campaigners, the bill was condemned right-wing parties and the Catholic Church. And that's the latest BBC World News.
I'm Emily Webb, and if you've just joined us on Outlook, today we're focusing on two people caught in a nightmarish diving disaster. One is a diving supervisor, Craig Frederick. In 2012, he was on a ship overseeing two divers who were doing some work on an oil well at the bottom of the North Sea when they lost control of the vessel. The ship was connected to something called a diving bell, an underwater pressurized chamber, and Craig told the divers to go back there. Both divers began to climb their umbilical cords back to the diving bell. The umbilicals gave them air, heat, communication. But the umbilical of one of the divers, Chris Lemons, then got stuck on a structure on the ocean floor. And as the out-of-control ship drifted away, it dragged the diving bell with it. This meant that not only was Chris trapped at the bottom of the sea, he was turned into a human anchor.
Chris, we cannot give you any slack.
I could feel the tension from everybody saying, look, it's going tighter and tighter, we can't slack it. It's starting to fail. There's electricity cables in there, there's air cables in there, gas cables. Obviously they were failing one by one.
You got to clean that umbilical yourself.
it's I can remember actually calling out, apologising to her several times, you know, screaming up into the air, I'm so sorry, Morag, I'm so sorry.
Then he blacked out. Back on the ship, and the situation wasn't improving. That's where Craig had been watching everything unfold. You see, Chris had been attached to a camera and a microphone which Craig could monitor. But when the umbilical cord snapped,
all my monitors went dead, so I had a completely different viewpoint than the divers. Normally I have lights and cameras, and I had all that up until the point Chris's umbilical parted.
As he looked at the black screen, Craig knew that the ship wasn't moving towards Chris. It was drifting away, and the crew still hadn't managed to gain control of it. How aware were you of the fact he only had 5 minutes of oxygen on him?
Very aware. I mean, I make a calculation before every project and work out how much gas they've got for the depth they're working at. And the 5 minutes is a little bit lean. It was more between 9 and 10 minutes, but 5 minutes is good enough. Depends on how quickly he breathes. But no, I was acutely aware that the clock was ticking for us to go effect a rescue.
Did you realise, therefore, as you were moving away from him, as so much was happening around you, that the chances of getting to him in time, getting to him before that air supply ran out, that they were pretty slim?
Well, at the time, we didn't understand what had happened to the vessel. And normally, we would regain control of the ship quite quickly, and we would go back to where we were, and then we would be in this vicinity of where Chris was last spotted, if you want, by Dave. So up until, 5, 7, 8, 10 minutes, I was supremely confident we would just go back and effect a rescue, because it was unheard of not to regain control of the ship in that length of time. I've never known a ship to be lost control and unable to navigate itself for such a long length of time.
So how long was it until you were able to regain that control?
Maybe 20 minutes. We drifted at maybe 250 meters away from where we were last situated, so it was a little bit of a hole to get back to that first location.
So when they regained the control after 20 minutes, and as you were trying to maneuver the ship to get it back towards the side, how were you feeling?
I was under the spotlight, but I wasn't going to relinquish control of the dive to anyone else. It was certainly my responsibility.
Something that they were able to do as they moved back towards the dive site was to send an ROV, a remote operated vehicle, ahead. It's an underwater device with a camera on it.
The pilot of the ROV, he saw the structure first, and Chris had somehow made it back to the top of the structure, and he was lying prone on top of the structure, and yeah, it was dramatic because it came over the top of the hill, if you want, over the top of the structure, and there he was, exactly where we hoped he would be.
And can you tell me what his body was doing?
He wasn't moving around the top of the structure. He was lying on his back, and his arms were sort of up at 45 degrees, but like floating, and he was twitching slightly.
The footage of Chris taken when he was on top of that oil well is pretty eerie. He was unconscious, alone, and twitching. But even though they could see him, the ship was still about 10 minutes away. How long was it after he had been disconnected that you made it back to the site and Dave was able to dive down to rescue him?
I would say 35 minutes, probably, something like that.
Okay, Dave, you're clear to go.
Dave went from the diving bell to the structure to get Chris. He thought that this was a trick to recover Chris's body, that there was no way he could have possibly survived underwater for so long with no oxygen. He brought him back to the bell where Duncan, their third team member, was waiting. Tell me about the footage of Chris coming back onto the diving bell and Duncan giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
He readjusted his body weight, Duncan, in the bell to take his hat off, and the camera in the bell is at the top of the bell, looking down like a fisheye. So I couldn't really see what was going on, so I had to take it from gospel or from Duncan rather, what are you doing? He says, I'm trying to get his hat off. What's happening now? I got his hat off. He's really blue. And then he gave him 2 rescue breaths, I guess. And then I just waited for the reaction of what was going to happen next.
And when the reaction was that he started breathing, how surprised were you that it was so quick?
Well, I get goosebumps now talking about it and even thinking about it. He just said, look, he's alive, he's breathing, he's actually talking. And it was remarkable for one, Duncan to say that, and then 2, I saw him, being helped back into the belt and sat down, and it looked like he just had a bit of a rough day, but he was a normal 6-hour dive,
One of the first faces you did see was somebody that you'd actually been calling out for, who was Duncan.
Yeah, his beaming one, which was lovely, yeah. He's a friendly man at the best of times, but we were particularly friendly in that moment. It was really lovely and comforting to see him,
Because there is this, I don't really know how to describe it, but this completely bizarre moment where Craig calls down to you and he says, are you all right?
I just said, Chris, how are you doing? Everything okay? You don't want to make more of a drama out of a situation that's already got enough dramatics in it.
And you just kind of nod and you just say, yeah.
I don't have any massive recollection of that, but it's on camera, so there's no denying it,
I think he said something like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm cold.
How did you feel physically?
Exhausted. I think I was in shock a bit. I vomited a little bit when I got back. But beyond that, nothing. I was good. So I had a bit of bruising on the inside of my leg from where I'd been trapped against the structure. But fundamentally, I felt absolutely fine, which in itself is, to me, is more miraculous than the survival itself. To go 30, 35 minutes with nothing to breathe, it's as remarkable to me that I survived.
Oh, no, I'm looking only. Just a minute.
Tatiana. I did speak to you and we were taken through and shown some of the footage. I thought, oh my gosh, I was a lucky boy.
You were very lucky. And when he did make it back onto the ship, a very happy crew was waiting.
I think he ended up with a tea cozy on his head as a good luck charm, But it was remarkable to see. I mean, I think by then, we all realised that we had participated in something that might become special.
But obviously, there's one big, huge question. How were you able to survive that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't think I'll ever know is the truth. We have theories. I have theories. I'd always assumed it was the cold. You hear stories of young children or even adults falling into freezing cold water and surviving for long periods because everything's shut down essentially and it stretches out the moment of their death really. That seemed like the obvious reason. But I think we come to realise that it was as much to do with the gas we carried on our back. So the emergency gas has this higher concentration of oxygen than the normal gas we breathe. That, along with the pressure, effectively saturated my tissues and my organs, my vital organs, with oxygen, such that they didn't start dying. They obviously just enough. So miraculous, but as yet unexplained, I guess.
How long was it after that happened that you saw Morag again?
We had this 4 days of decompression. I again naively had said to Morag, I'm fine, don't worry, I'll see you when I get home. But that wasn't good enough.
Keep
so
watching.
She quite rightly jumped in the car and drove.
Watch the mini.
So I think literally 15 minutes after we were released from the chamber, Morag was walking
Keep
up
watching.
and I met her there, which was a lovely and emotional moment, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Because you'd had that period where you thought, I may never see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Period you're never going to see you, and all those hopes and dreams we did have for our future weren't going to happen, and that I was going to cause this incredible pain. Yeah, when you talk of a moment of relief, that's probably was more of a moment of relief when I saw her, and sometimes it's the touch of another human being, isn't it, that triggers the switch, perhaps. Yeah, so yeah, it was an emotional moment.
You did get married 6 months later, and in your groom speech, you made a reference to the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation you had got. Can you tell me what you said?
Yeah, it was, well, Duncan was very kind. Kindly came to our wedding. I did it by Dave as well. He was professional that he is. He was back at work. I think I said, I'd like to say thank you to one of two men in this room who's given me a decent kiss on the lips. Yeah.
One person in the room here is definitely going to hate this. Probably one of only two men in this room giving me a decent kiss on the lips.
I won't explain the other one to you. And it got a round of applause.
It did.
Standing ovation.
Did it get a standing ovation?
I didn't buy a drink.
I think you deserve a standing ovation for that. Something that I was surprised by, I imagine other people would be surprised by, is that you went back to work not that long
Nervous laughter. But it was strange. I think as soon as we got into the water, the same three, Duncan and Dave and myself, we all went back together to the same place. Once we were back in the water and back on a job, it's incredible how quickly you forget things and just focus on what you're doing. So there was a lot of Mickey taking, a lot of abuse through my ear. To be honest, I didn't get any at all the sympathy I thought I deserved. It was lovely actually. I think everybody normalised it that way. We just carried on as normal, and I think that probably was the best way to deal with it. It was a really freak occurrence in terms of the root cause. It's a well-regulated, very safe form of diving, as strange as that may seem.
Can you still enjoy diving? Do you still enjoy diving?
It's like any job, it's got good days and bad days, but it did before. Some days it's like being a spaceman, you're bound around on the seabed, slightly weightless. You climb these big climbing frames, slightly weightless, it's great. Seeing the fish living in that chamber, it has elements of the space station about it. We get our food passed in on little silver trays, and there's pressure differentials, and you're going out to this alien world with a big hat on and gas supply through an umbilical. And I've read books by astronauts who spent a year in space, and lots of little things as well, which they mention, which ring very true. So yeah, it's a flattering compliment, to be honest. There's something.
Chris Lemons and Craig Frederick in 2019. There's a film about the accident called Last Breath, and thanks to Dogwolf for letting us use those recordings. And before we leave you, a reminder that you can access all of the incredible stories we cover here on Outlook on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. One that I'd recommend is an interview with Jerry Foster. He's an American helicopter pilot who revolutionized modern news reporting in the 1970s. He became so popular, he even got his own theme song.
I was the best known news guy in the state. We were the first station in the country, I believe in the world, that had a helicopter owned by the TV station, and that just caught on all over the country.
Based in Arizona, he was known for being first on the scene with his TV camera. His reputation was such that emergency services sometimes relied on him to help out with an incident. He told me about a time that happened, when some students got into difficulties when they were out rafting.
There's one girl stayed in the raft and she was trying to hang on to it. I put a highway patrolman on my skid.
Which means that the highway patrolman was outside the cockpit, hanging from the base of the helicopter.
She had a rope tied around her arm. It was also tied to a life preserver. But when she came out of the raft, she went underwater.
The girl was submerged 2 feet below the surface of the river, and Jerry had to think quickly.
The water was moving so fast that I had to get down in front of her, and I had the highway patrolman on my skid. I dumped the belly of the helicopter into the water. He was able to grab her by the arm. We got her up and took her to the shore. She wasn't breathing. We gave her CPR. We were so intent on getting her breathing again.
They were worried it was too late. But then
she gasped, opened her eyes, and started
40 now.
I'm going to tell you, that was the most spectacular moment of our lives.
the episode is called The King of the Wild Blue Sky. Find it on the Outlook podcast or on our homepage. Look for the Amazing Aviators collection. Outlook will be back over the weekend, so until then, from me, Emily Webb, and the whole team, goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Witness History from the BBC World Service with me, Alex Last. And today, a story about isolation. So we go back to 2010 and the Mars 500 experiment in Moscow, when for almost 18 months, 6 men were locked inside a simulated spaceship to test human endurance for a possible trip to Mars.
We knew that no human had done this.
Observe the new speed limit.
You don't know how exactly how you're going to react. It was very uncertain what could happen psychologically, physically.
Diego Urbina is a space systems engineer, but back in the late 2000s, he was chosen for the Mars 500 experiment set up by the European Space Agency, Russia and China, in which volunteers were locked inside a fake spaceship on Earth for 520 days.
The purpose of the mission was to study the isolation and confinement of a full round trip to Mars. That's about 1.5 years, and studying the human psychology and human physiology during such a trip. And I was very interested in learning what it would be like, because my intention was to continue working in the space sector. And from a personal point of view, it was once in a lifetime experience.
Some 40,000 people applied to take part. 6 men were selected, 3 Russians, a Frenchman, a Chinese man, and Diego, who's Italian-Colombian, all had engineering or medical backgrounds.
They were all really great guys and just really nice people to get along with, and funny people with a nice sense of humor. I think that's one of the main characteristics.
And on the 3rd of June 2010, they were sealed inside the simulated spacecraft, housed inside a big warehouse in Moscow.
On that day, we were extremely excited, getting familiar with the spaceship. If you went in for the first time, it would look very, very small, and you would think, okay, how am I going to live here for so long? But then you get used to it, and it's fine. And so in terms of area, it's like a couple of metro cars, because that's the shape that the spaceships need to have to fit in rockets, just like the International Space Station. So these sort of tubes.
Within these cramped windowless tubes, the crew had small separate bedrooms, a living area, a kitchen, a food store, a greenhouse, a medical module, and even a simulated lander. For they would be treated as if they were on a real mission to Mars. They would do experiments. Halfway through, they would simulate a landing. They could get messages via ground control, but that was it.
We were on Earth, but it didn't matter what was outside. So at some point, it just stopped being Moscow, and it started being just isolated place in the middle of nowhere that might as well have been space.
To study the physical and psychological response of the men during the mission, the crew were monitored and had to undergo a constant battery of tests. They also faced some unexpected challenges too.
They told us there's a fire outside, and they cut the power, and all the lights went off. Also, the life support system stopped working, so the thing that cleaned up the air stopped working. We're asking, okay, how long are we going to survive with the air that we have here? We're asking questions. They wouldn't answer these things.
But as it turned out, the emergencies were not real. It was all just part of the test.
It was funny because then they told us, okay, it was just a simulation. You did well, and we did not believe that it was a simulation. We thought that it was a real thing, and they were just trying to, make us calm.
Past the time we're not working, they had access to gym equipment, books, films, and video games. And says Diego, the crew got on well. There were, he insists, no major arguments.
We, of course, had maybe small frictions, like the ones that you might have at work with other colleagues, but there was always a way around. We also never had like these discussions of, okay, let's sit down, let's solve this issue, blah, blah, blah. It was never like that. It was more like, it's easier to just tell some jokes to solve things.
After 8 months, Diego was one of 3 who would take part in the Mars landing. For 2 weeks, they'd be sealed off in a small module to simulate a lander. Then, wearing spacesuits adapted for the weight on Mars, they would leave the lander's airlock and walk on the surface of the planet, which in this case was a huge sandy area within the warehouse. Yet for the team, it felt very real.
After 8 months of just basically living between 4 walls, very close to your face, you had this huge area that is completely different. It was just the best thing in the world.
After 257 days of simulated spaceflight, 2 cosmonauts preparing to step out onto the surface
8-month journey back. Psychologists noted that in between the landmark events of the mission, the crew's mood would drop when they realized they still had so long to go.
There were different periods for sure, waves of feeling extremely nice, and some parts in which you were feeling like a little bit moody. I definitely